Hi, folks. How's it going? It's so good to see your faces. It's so good to see you all here. Oh my gosh. Hi, I'm Anjana Vakil. I'm a developer advocate at Observable, and I am just beside myself happy to be here with you all, whether IRL or on the live stream. What's up, y'all? And I am really excited to talk to everybody today about interactive dataviz in React. The slides for this presentation and all of the links and everything are up at that URL on observablehq.com, and I will try to tweet that out after the talk as well. So I am relatively new to the world of dataviz as a software developer, JavaScript developer myself, but here's some of the stuff I've been learning about data visualization. So one thing is that when you have a bunch of data, visualizing it, putting it in front of people's eyeballs in an effective way can be the most awesome way to quickly discover actual meaning from that data, see patterns in it, get some actual insights, be able to make decisions based on it. And that means that dataviz is an extremely useful component in a lot of different types of web apps. So, of course, any kind of dashboard you might be building, there's probably going to be a dataviz involved. Anytime you're trying to give your users insights into their own data on your platforms. Raise your hand if you've had to build some kind of dataviz in any of your apps. OK, lots of hands, and I'm sure lots of cyberspace hands as well. So this means it's also a very valuable skill to have on your resume or as part of your developer portfolio, so something worthwhile to learn a little bit about. However, dataviz is a wide field. It is something you could spend your entire life and career digging into and getting a dissertation, writing a dissertation in, and becoming an expert in, and never get to the bottom of. So does that mean that in order to build effective visualizations in my apps, I have to, on top of all of the regular web and React and JavaScript stuff that I need to know, I have to also learn about statistical analysis and color theory and human visual perception and all of these different things? Like, that sounds really overwhelming and difficult. How can I build a good visualization without having to rededicate my life to learning everything there is to know about dataviz? So it can seem really daunting, it can seem really hard. What hopefully we're going to explore today in the short time we have together is how we can make a non-trivial, reactive, interactive data visualization app in React without having to learn everything there is to know about dataviz. How can I stand on the shoulders of giants and get this dataviz up and running as quickly as possible? So what we've got here, and this is what we're going to build today if the demo gods are with us, is a simple visualization of the frequency of different letters in the English language. And it's something that I can, as a user, I can sort in whatever way I want to see it. So I can sort them by the descending frequency and see that, oh, it's a little covered up here, but that E is the most frequent letter. So this is what we're going to try to build, and we're going to hopefully see how we don't need to reinvent the wheel to do it. The tool that we're going to use for this job is a new, relatively new, open source dataviz library called Observable Plot. So Plot, like Observable, was created by the same person who created the library D3, if folks have heard of that or encountered that, seeing some nods. So Mike Bostock, who's also a CTO at Observable, and some of our other teammates at Observable put together this awesome dataviz library that was released open source earlier this year. And Plot is a very high-level library, so it allows you to really quickly get a meaningful chart up and running, while at the same time giving you the flexibility to be able to customize and build exactly the right type of visualization that you need for your purposes, as opposed to choosing one out of a limited set of options out of the box. So how it does this is thanks to a very simple and yet very powerful API that is built on the notion of something called a grammar of graphics. So this is a way of thinking about describing and systematizing how we can put together a chart, pretty much any kind of chart we can imagine, from a few basic concepts. And this is something that's been around in the dataviz world for a long time. So we've got like experts and tons of decades of research in dataviz kind of baked into this grammar of graphics. And then Plot itself employs this grammar of graphics but implements it on top of D3. So we've also got Mike and the rest of the D3 team's decade of experience building SVG-based visualizations for the web all baked into this library. So it's essentially like having a little dataviz expert friend in your pocket that can just help you figure out the best chart to build. And so how it does that is by means of a few key concepts. We're not going to go in detail into all of them. You could read all about it. But there are things like marks, which are the visual elements we see on the page. This might be a bar, it might be a line, it might be dots in a scatter plot. There are scales, which are essentially functions that transform the values that I have in my data set, so in my data space, into values in the actual visual representation. So this might be taking like those frequency numbers and turning them into pixels of how high the bar is going to be on the screen. And then a couple of features that we're not going to talk too much about but are super useful for creating more custom visualizations, things like transforms, so we can do aggregations like sum, mean, that sort of thing, and facets, which allow you to take a data viz and split it up into smaller sub-visualizations that each focus on a subset of the data. So with these just few concepts, which don't take too long to wrap your head around, you can actually create really powerful and really complex graphs that totally fit whatever your needs are. But at the same time, you can allow the defaults built into Plot to kind of make a lot of the decisions for you so that you don't need to learn everything there is to know about how to perfectly lay out things on the screen. So let's take a look at what it actually feels like to write some Plot. Hopefully folks can read this okay in the back. I'm going to take that as a yes. OK, so what I've got here is some data about these letters and their relative frequency. So I've got an array of little data objects, datums, that have a letter and a frequency property. To create a plot, it is a simple call to the plot method on this sort of capital P plot object, which is going to create an SVG. And this SVG is super boring. It is just a blank SVG that does nothing. So let's fix that. Let's actually visualize some data here. I mentioned super briefly that Plot has a notion of marks, the visual elements that we see on the page. So here I want to make a bar chart. I can do that by calling the bar y method on Plot, which is, because we're going to be doing these vertical bars, there's also a bar x for horizontal. That's going to take in the data that I want to visualize, in this case my little data array, and then I'm going to pass in an object that tells Plot how to map properties of the data to properties of the actual SVG on the screen. In this case, we're going to tell it, hey, take the x-axis and use that to show the letter property in my data. And then on the y-axis, I want you to put the frequency property. And once I evaluate that, boom, I've already got a meaningful chart. And Plot did a ton of heavy lifting here that I would have otherwise had to think about and build myself. So for example, figuring out how to lay everything out on both of these axes, figuring out how tall the tallest bar in my visualization is going to be, and setting up the y-axis appropriately, adding labels, adding the ticks in the right places, et cetera, et cetera. So Plot is making a lot of really well-informed decisions for me behind the scenes. And however, I can customize it however I'd like. So for example, by default, it's just laying out all of these letters in the order that they appeared, so in alphabetical order in this case. But if I want to change that, in my bar y mark, I can pass in a sort property and say, hey, Plot, sort the stuff on the x-axis by its value on the y-axis. Boom. It does it for me. I don't have to worry about the values in the data. Plot will figure it out for me. And likewise, if I say, actually, I want to see it in the other order, the descending order, I can just add a reverse true. And there we go. So we're already starting to have a not super trivial chart here built up from, again, a super declarative API. And there are other configurations I can put on the chart itself. Like if I want to add a grid on the y-axis, I can do that so that it is a little bit easier to see what the values of those bars are across the horizontal dimension. And I can actually combine different types of marks. And so this is where, again, we're not boxed in by sort of a certain set of given out-of-the-box visualizations. I can add additional marks. So maybe I want to show, OK, imagine all of the letters in English were used exactly the same amount. What would that frequency be? So let's put a rule, a straight line, at a certain value on the y-axis so that it goes straight across so we can compare how much more frequent or less frequent different letters are to that kind of uniform frequency. So I can call the rule y method here. In this case, I'm going to pass in just a single value, which is going to be what I would expect that frequency to be if all the letters were the same, which is 1 over the number of letters I have. In this case, it's 26. And if I remember a comma here, plot will draw that line for me. And of course, so right now it's not the most visually exciting chart. We don't have any color going on, but I can change that as well by adding configuration options that are largely based on properties that we might be familiar from SVGs. So I can set, for example, the stroke color to orange. Or maybe I want to make it a little bit wider. So I'll set a stroke width of maybe 3. So now I can see that, like L is about breaking even, and C is like much less frequent than normal, and E is way out there, huge outlier. Okay, so now we've got it's a trivial example, these letter frequencies, unless you're a linguist by background, like I am, in which case it's very exciting. But we can see that in just a few lines of code, and probably more minutes than I should have taken because I've been yapping, but in just a few minutes and a few lines of code, we've got a meaningful chart, and yet it's not anything out of the box that I just had to like take the defaults of. I can configure them as I see fit. Okay, so by this point, you're probably saying, all right, I thought we were at a React conference. Where's the React happening? How do we make this React? So what plot is doing, as we said, is creating an SVG with all of these little bars and ticks and lines and so on and so forth. I don't want to have to hand code that in my React app. So what I'm going to do is let plot manipulate its little SVG element and fill it in with all of the chart stuff that it wants to draw. And in order to allow React to kind of delegate that DOM manipulation to plot, we're going to use a couple of handy hooks. useRef, which is going to let us connect into a DOM node that then plot can do its thing inside of. And useEffect, which is where we're actually going to be letting plot do the rendering of that SVG and any updates when the state changes. Then, of course, we have to remember to clean up after ourselves. OK, so if the demo gods are with us, let us take to the code sandbox and try to make a chart app happen real fast. OK, so what I've got here, and again, hopefully folks can see in the back, what I've got here is basically a bog standard create React app. All I've done is kind of change the title, and I've got a couple things ready to import just to help us along here. The first thing I want to do is bring observable plot into my project as a dependency, so I can add it in as observable HQ/plot. Oh, thank you, Code Sandbox, for making that so easy. Amazing. OK, so now we've got, now we can import this capital P plot from observable HQ plot. OK, so a couple of other things I have going on here. I've got my data, this same letter data that we just saw. And later, we're going to add a little drop down to explore that reactivity. So let me pull in my data as well here. Now, we said we want to allow plot to do its own thing in a div in our app. So I'm going to start creating a component here. We can call it, I don't know, we'll call it letterviz for now. It's going to be the most boring thing ever. It's going to return an empty div. OK, not exciting yet. And then we'll be able to insert this in our app here. And then probably we're going to want to visualize some data. So why don't I pass in that data as a prop here, and I can pass it in here. Again, right now we're just loading this like hard-coded letter data from this file, but you'd probably be pulling in your data from wherever it is, your API, what have you. We're not going to cover that part. OK, so now I need to hook up plot to this div right here. And for that, our friend useRef comes in. So let me grab useRef, and we're also going to use a couple other hooks, useEffect and later useState. And let's create a new ref where plot can do its thing. So I can call this plotref, and just call useRef. This is just going to start off as a little object which has a current property, which is going to be set to null at first. But if I hook it up to this div, plotref here, now when React renders this div, plotref.current is going to be the actual node, this div node in the DOM, which I can then tell plot to do its thing with. Inside of a useEffect is where I'm going to make that happen. So let us get our useEffect going here. Oop. And what we're going to do is grab our bar chart from over here. Control C. Bar chart will be this plot.plot. Okay, so exactly what I did before. This is now, we're going to capture that SVG element as bar chart. And oh yes, data is involved here. So I'm going to add data to the dependencies of this use effect here. All right, now, nothing is on the screen because I haven't yet let plot do its thing. So let's make that happen. As we said before, once React has rendered the div there, and after that is when this use effect is going to run, I'm going to have a reference to plotref.current is going to be that div. So what I can do is just let plot's bar chart sit right inside of that. Okay, now we're getting some things on the screen, except too many things. Uh-oh, because I'm not cleaning up after myself. So this is the gotcha. If I'm using useref, I am, to quote Rachel yesterday, escaping, using the escape hatch from React. So I don't get all of the free nice things that React usually does for me, like clean up after me, like it's my maid. So instead, I have to clean up after myself. Oh no, woe is me. That's not so bad though, because I can return a callback, which essentially does the opposite operation of this append. We can take our bar chart and remove it from the DOM. So this is the trade-off with if I want plot to do the heavy lifting of putting this whole chart together for me so that I don't have to hand code little rect elements and whatever inside of an SVG, this is all I have to do. I have to use ref, but remember that since I am escaping React, I have to also clean up after myself and be a good neighbor. All right, so now if I refresh my app here, hopefully we've only got one chart going on. All right, excellent. Now we have some problems with the layout here. Let's add some margins, which I can do in plot real quick, just to fix that a little bit. And this will hopefully make it more readable. Okay, so here we have it. Let me hide this. We're getting there. We've got a chart. We did it. And again, the pattern that we're using is to grab this useref, connect it to our div, and then in the use effect, let plot, or whatever DOM manipulating library you might be using, do its thing, add its SVG in, and then remove it when we want to update the next time. All right, so now for the reactivity part. We with me? We're going to make now this little sort selector so that my user can decide how they would like to best see their information, which is really powerful. When you get to have your hands on the data and play around with it and change the visualization in certain ways so that you can explore a data set, that makes it even easier to find those insights and those patterns. So in this simple example, we're going to add that little drop down, which I've got a tiny little component for over in this other file. I'm going to import that and then create a drop-down inside of my letter chart. So to do that, I'm just going to bring in my drop-down component. I can give it a title, call it sort by. I can give it some options, an array of values to choose from. The default one was alphabetical, so let's keep that in there. And then we'll have descending frequency and ascending frequency in case my users want to use either of those. And then if I remember to close all of my things, and make this symmetrical, hopefully. Okay, so now we've got a little thingy on the screen that allows folks to use this select widget to choose an option. It's just not doing anything yet because we haven't connected it to the plot chart. So let's fix that. So earlier I had brought in a use state hook, our good old friend. So what we can do is create a sort property and a set sort using our use state hook. We can give the default value of that alphabetical just to start it off with something. And then what I can do in my dropdown is pass in a little onChange handler, which is going to take in the change event, where somebody chose a different option in the dropdown, and is going to set the sort to whatever the option was that they actually chose. Okay, so now, hopefully, this is updating our state, but there's no visual effect of that because we haven't brought the state into our use effect yet. So let's do that. So the first thing I want to do is bring my sort proper variable here into the dependencies of the use effect. And then, so for example here, we added that sort property with this little configuration object. We can now make choices about how we want this property to look based on the value of the sort. So if sort is alphabetical, I can actually just decide to do nothing. And then if I have a non-alphabetical sort, I can choose the order, whether this will be reversed or not, based on whether that value is descending. If it is, then reverse things, and if not, then don't. So now, if I haven't messed up, which is a big if, I have a reactively updating but declaratively written chart happening in my app. So I hope you all feel, as I do, that because of this declarative API that Plot offers, because I'm not manually, imperatively manipulating the chart, I am just declaring this is what I want the chart to look like. Plot, you figure out how to draw it. I'm not going to concern myself with that. Because of that, it feels nice with this reactive application, because I can make choices just like I would in another component to decide which elements to render based on the state of my app. So we did it. We made, in not too much time, a reactive dataviz app. It's, I don't know how often we're going to want to look at the relative frequency of letters in the English language, again, unless you're language nerds like me. But hopefully this gives you an idea of the type of custom, reactive, responsive applications you can build with a library like Plot and its declarative API. Yay! All right, thank you, demo gods. Okay. Okay. So we're almost out of time here, but just a couple more words. So hopefully this felt pretty easy. What do y'all think? I mean, we didn't have to think about scales. We didn't have to think about mappings between the values of my actual data and the layout of the bars on the screen. Plot took care of all of that for us, and yet I was able to override values as I needed. So could it possibly get any easier to drop a chart into my app? Well, so Observable, observablehq.com, is an in-browser, JavaScript-based, reactive dataviz prototyping and display also environment. You can poke around on the site, and you'll find tons of examples, because it's also an awesome community of tons of creators who build the coolest visualizations. Like, I do not know how they do it. So there are amazing examples, not just with the Plot library, but with other libraries like D3. And from any Observable notebook, you can actually grab a little snippet of embed code to either drop in a self-contained little iframe element, plunk, done, or to actually generate the React component code that you would need if you want to paste that into your app and then manipulate it as you want to integrate it with the rest of your application. So that's pretty easy. And super exciting, just last week, like 5 minutes ago, we released some open source reusable functions that you can call to generate a complete D3-based chart. So this is a sort of a new development in D3 examples where you don't have to figure out how to imperatively replicate these cool D3 charts you see around. There are a bunch of different functions like histograms, sand tree diagrams, tree diagrams, all kinds of different stuff. You can find all the examples up on observablehq.com. And using the exact same pattern that we just saw, you can insert this into a React app. So having a useRef and useEffect pattern that we just saw, you can call a histogram function and get an instant histogram, customize it as you see fit, make it red, make it whatever. And again, using that same use useRef, use useEffect, clean up after yourself pattern that we just saw. So hopefully these are both really easy ways to take all of the awesome years and decades of experience that these awesome dataviz developers have that have been baked into these examples and these APIs, these libraries, to not have to learn all of that ourselves, so we can just get a cool chart that does the thing that helps our users understand the data we want them to understand. Okay, so super quick recap, because I think I'm a couple minutes over, sorry, is that Plot, hopefully we've seen, is a high enough level library that you can get a really convenient chart up and running with a couple lines of code, and yet it doesn't box you in to only specific examples. You can customize it based on combining these few different concepts. Because it has a declarative API, it feels real nice in a reactive application. It was actually designed to be used in a reactive context in Observable, but React is another perfectly great application. useRef and useEffect are our friends if we want to delegate DOM manipulation to another library, so I don't have to hand code everything. And the examples we saw of D3 charts and other examples you might find around Observable, you can pull those into your apps as well. So thank you so much. There's a bunch of further reading linked on the slides. If you want to dig more into plot, if you want to dig more into D3 as well, there's also lots of good resources out there. And I thank you so much for being here with me. It's been awesome talking to y'all.